When strangers hurt you, you move on. But when it's your own children who turn their backs, the wound cuts deeper. Too deep to forget. That morning, as I sat alone in my cramped apartment, I listened to the water dripping from my ceiling. I'd placed an old metal pot underneath to catch the steady drops, but each ping echoed like a reminder of how far I had fallen. I was 62, retired after teaching high school English for 35 years in Springfield, Massachusetts. My name is Michelle Campbell. I had raised 2 children, Melissa and Samuel, on my own after my husband died young. I paid for their education, made sure they never felt the absence of a father. I gave everything. But the kindness I had taught them, the values I had lived by, didn't survive in them. The rain outside hit harder against the window, like the world was mocking me. I called my landlord again, for the 5th time that month. "There's a new leak in the kitchen now too," I told her. She sounded tired but unmoved. "You'll have to wait till next week," she said, as if I wasn't standing in the middle of a home slowly falling apart. After I hung up, I stared at the spreading water stains on the ceiling. They looked like rot, like the decay of everything I had built. Then came the notification. A new post from Melissa on Instagram. I should have ignored it. But I looked. I always looked. And there she was. My daughter, smiling in front of a beautiful colonial house. Her arm wrapped around her mother-in-law Patricia. The caption stung more than the image. Asterisk, so excited to help Mom P move into her dream home. She deserves every comfort after all she's done for our family. Hashtag blessed, hashtag family first. Asterisk Mom P. Not me. Patricia. The woman who had criticized Melissa until she married her son, Charles, the investment banker. A woman who now lived in luxury, while I scraped by in a crumbling apartment. My phone buzzed again. I scrolled through the comments. Strangers calling my daughter an angel, praising her for being such a wonderful daughter-in-law. Not one word about me. I put the phone down, my hand trembling slightly. I remembered how, 3 months ago, I'd asked Melissa if I could stay with them for a while, just until my apartment got fixed. Their house had 5 bedrooms. 5. She couldn't even meet my eyes. "It's not a good time, Mom. Charles is up for partner. We need to keep the right image. You understand, don't you?" And I did understand. I understood that I embarrassed her. I was a worn-out reminder of a life she wanted to forget. Then the phone rang. A number I didn't recognize. "Is this Michelle Campbell?" The voice was calm, professional. "Yes, who's calling?" "Yes. My name is Michael Abernathy. I'm an attorney with Pearson Abernathy and Klein in Boston. I'm calling about your brother, William Campbell." Froze. I hadn't heard William's name in years. We hadn't spoken in nearly 2 decades. "What about him?" There was a pause. "I'm sorry to inform you he passed away last month. Pancreatic cancer. It was quite sudden. I didn't know what to feel. William and I had once been close, before the divorce, before he believed the lies my ex-husband told. He'd chosen Thomas over me, and I had never forgiven him for it. But now he was gone. I sank into the sofa, the old springs creaking beneath me. "There's more," the lawyer continued. "William named you as the sole beneficiary in his will." I laughed. A bitter, dry sound. "That can't be right. We haven't spoken in years." "Nevertheless," he said, "you're the beneficiary. He amended his will 8 months ago after his diagnosis. He left you everything. His house in Beacon Hill, investment portfolio and art collection. The estate is valued at around $12 million. The air left my lungs. $12 million. I could barely afford heating bills, and now I was a millionaire. He also left you a letter," the lawyer added. "We'd like to schedule a time for you to come to the office." I agreed, barely processing his words. After we hung up, I stared at the water still dripping into the pot on my floor. $12 million. William had given me everything in death that he hadn't given me in life. I opened my phone again and looked at Melissa's photo with Patricia. Mom P deserves every comfort. I took a deep breath, then opened my text messages. I found the last one I'd sent to Samuel. Just a simple, "Did you get the card I sent?" It was marked as read. No reply. I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. Gray roots, tired eyes, lines carved from years of silent pain. For a long time I saw someone forgotten. But now something was shifting. Not just in my finances but in me. A sharpness was taking root where sorrow used to live. And in that moment I realized something. I was done begging to be seen. The following Monday, I traveled to Boston for the meeting with William's attorney. The city felt unfamiliar yet somehow welcoming, as if it knew I no longer belonged to the small, quiet life I'd led for decades. Pearson Abernathy and Klein's office was high above the street. Glass, steel, and polished surfaces that reflected a world I had never been part of. Michael Abernathy greeted me with the kind of practiced warmth that only lawyers possess. He handed me a thick envelope, then slid a stack of papers across the table for me to sign. The letter from William was at the top. I hesitated before opening it. My hands shook slightly, but I forced myself to read. Michelle, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. Cancer has a way of clarifying what matters. I was wrong about Thomas. I found out the truth years ago, but pride stopped me from calling you. I saw everything though. I saw how Melissa and Samuel treated you. How they forgot the sacrifices you made. I did the same. I hope this gift gives you the freedom I never had. I read it twice, then folded it carefully and placed it in my bag. William had watched from a distance, seen what I hadn't let myself admit. That my children had grown into people I no longer recognized. The townhouse was mine now. A 5-story building in Beacon Hill, standing proud among Boston's elite. It didn't feel real, but it was. That evening I stepped through its doors for the first time. Original wood floors, marble fireplace, crown moldings. It was like walking into a museum of someone else's life. My brother's life. I moved room to room, not touching anything at first, just observing. His study was full of old books and framed articles. And in the corner an album. Inside were newspaper clippings, photos of my old teaching awards, even a write-up from when I self-published a book of poetry. I ran my fingers over the yellowed pages, stunned. He'd followed my life all these years. Silently. I didn't sleep in the master bedroom. Not yet. Instead, I chose the guest room and lay under heavy covers, staring at the ornate ceiling. I thought about the last 20 years, about birthdays spent alone, holidays passed in silence, texts unanswered. I thought about the way Melissa looked at Patricia like a queen, and how Samuel only reached out when he needed help. And I made a decision. The next morning, I met with William's financial advisor, a sharp-eyed young woman named Amara. She walked me through the accounts, the stocks, the structure of the portfolio. "Your brother was very methodical," she said. "He reorganized everything after his diagnosis to reduce tax burden. You're looking at about $9 million after deductions." I nodded, trying to act like I understood this world. I didn't. Not yet. But I would. "I'd like to keep everything as is for now," I told her. "Just until I figure things out." She agreed, gave me her card, and promised to stay in touch. Over the next week I settled in. I hired a cleaning service. Bought new clothes, not flashy but proper, well-fitting things. I colored my hair back to auburn and let the stylist cut it into a shape that felt fresh. When I looked in the mirror, I saw someone I hadn't seen in decades. Someone who looked like she still had chapters left to write. Neither Melissa nor Samuel called. Not once. Not to check in. Not to ask where I had gone. Melissa had my number. I had texted her a photo of my ceiling the night before I left, with a simple message. "No need to worry about me. Everything's fine here." She'd read it. She hadn't replied. 10 days after moving in, I picked up the phone and dialed. "Mom." Melissa answered, her voice tinged with confusion. "Is everything okay?" Not "how are you," not "I missed you." Just suspicion. "Everything's fine," I said calmly. "I've had a change in my life. I'm in Boston now." "Boston?" Her voice pitched slightly. "What are you doing there?" "I came into some money," I said simply. "My brother passed away. He left me his estate." Silence. I could almost hear her breath catch. "Uncle Will. But you weren't speaking." "People can surprise you," I said. "Even after they're gone." I told her I'd moved permanently and was clearing out the old apartment. She didn't ask if I needed help. Didn't say she missed me. But her tone changed just slightly. Weeder. Calculating. "Charles and I should come visit. It's been so long." "Yes," I said with a smile she couldn't see. "It has. But I'm still settling in. Maybe in a few weeks." She agreed too quickly. Then asked the question she couldn't hold back. "Beacon Hill. That must be expensive." "It is." An hour later, Samuel called. "Hey, Mom," he said, like he hadn't ignored me for months. "Melissa told me about Uncle Will. It's amazing. For you, I mean." "Is it?" "Yes. You barely knew him." "Well, yeah, but it's still great. You've had it rough and now." "As if rough is temporary," I cut in. "How's the business venture?" He hesitated. "Actually, we're looking to expand. We could really use an investor." Smiled. "That sounds exciting. You should come visit. We can talk more then." He jumped at the chance. "I could fly out next weekend." "Perfect," I said. "I'll text you the address." Then I walked to William's study, my study, and looked out over the skyline. The pieces were falling into place. But this wasn't about getting even. This was about setting a new game in motion. One with rules I controlled. The taxi pulled up to the curb just as the afternoon light began to fade, casting long golden shadows on the cobblestone street. I stood at the window of my townhouse, watching as Samuel stepped out first, glancing up at the grand facade like he was sizing it up. He looked around, then reached for his wallet to pay the driver, something he usually avoided when someone else could do it. I hadn't offered to pick him up, deliberately. Let him find his own way for once. I took my time answering the door after he rang. "Mom," he said, grinning as if we'd spoken yesterday. He pulled me into a hug, tighter than anything I'd felt from him in years. "You look great," he said, eyes darting past me into the chandelier-lit foyer. "This place is incredible." "It is," I said simply, stepping aside. "Let me show you around." He followed eagerly, taking in every detail with that restless, hungry gaze. Just like his father. In the study, he lingered over the first edition books. In the dining room, he marveled at the antique silverware and oil paintings. "This stuff must be worth a fortune," he muttered. "Some things are beyond price," I replied, watching him closely. "They carry family history." An hour later, Melissa and Charles arrived, holding a bouquet of lilies, despite me telling her years ago I was allergic, and an expensive bottle of wine. Her face was carefully painted with warmth, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes. "Mom, you look amazing," she said. "Boston clearly agrees with you." "Money agrees with everyone," I said lightly. Dinner had been catered from one of Boston's finest restaurants. We dined on rack of lamb and perfectly roasted vegetables served on William's Wedgwood china, the table set with silver I'd never been able to afford. The conversation flowed like forced champagne. Light, rehearsed, artificial. They asked about William, about how I was adjusting. But what they really wanted to ask, how much what's in it for us, remained unspoken. I let it sit there between us, a quiet guest at the table. After dessert, I stood and said, "I've been thinking about the future. About legacy." Charles perked up immediately. "Family legacy is everything," he said, like a man trained to speak in boardrooms. Smiled. "Which is why I'd like you all to join me tomorrow. I have a meeting with my estate attorney." Melissa blinked. "Of course, Mom. Whatever you need." "It's not about what I need," I replied. "It's about what's right." That night, I sat alone in William's study, sipping his old scotch and reviewing the trust documents with Rebecca's notes. Everything was ready. The terms were clear. And they wouldn't see it coming. The next morning, I dressed in a navy blue suit that fit like armor. I applied makeup not to look younger but to look sharp, like someone who knew exactly what she was doing. Rebecca Lynn's office was sleek and cold, like the people my children had learned to become. We gathered around a polished table with a view of the Charles River behind us. Rebecca, ever professional, began the meeting. Michelle has asked me to explain the structure of her estate. Melissa and Samuel leaned in just slightly, trying to mask their eagerness. Rebecca continued. Michelle has inherited a substantial estate, approximately $9 million. She's decided to create a series of trusts. She handed each of them a folder. I watched their expressions as they flipped through. Confusion, surprise, growing tension. I don't understand, Melissa finally said. This says the main beneficiary is a foundation. That's correct, Rebecca said. The Michelle Campbell Foundation for Educational Equity will receive approximately $7 million. The rest is divided into 2 trusts, one for each of you. Samuel squinted at the fine print. It says, we get $50,000 a year, but only if we meet certain conditions? Rebecca nodded. Weekly phone calls, monthly visits, holiday attendance, normal things most families do out of love. You're bribing us to be your children. Melissa's voice cracked. No, I said calmly. I'm paying you to pretend to be the children I thought I had. The children I deserved. Samuel stood up. This is insane. You can't force people to care. You've been forcing me to care for years, I replied. Only calling when you needed money. Only showing up when it was convenient. Buying homes for others while I lived with leaking ceilings. Melissa looked like she'd been slapped. Charles stared silently at the table, clearly weighing the cost-benefit. Rebecca continued. There's also a clause about past loans, approximately $47,000. Michelle is willing to forgive them if you sign the agreement today. Those weren't loans, Samuel snapped. Those were gifts. I tilted my head. I have every message where you promised to repay me. Shall I read them aloud? Silence. Rebecca slid the contracts forward. You have 20 minutes. After that, the offer expires. They signed, of course. Greed has a way of silencing outrage. Their signatures came quickly. Samuel's bold, Melissa's delicate but tense. They didn't meet my eyes. Congratulations, Rebecca said. Your first disbursement begins next quarter, assuming you meet the conditions. On the way down to the lobby, no one spoke. Charles checked his phone. Melissa stared ahead, jaw tight. Samuel kept shifting, unsure of how to stand still. I've made lunch reservations, I said as we stepped outside. There's a lovely French bistro nearby. I'm not hungry, Melissa snapped. That's your choice, I said. But skipping lunch would count as your first violation. She looked at me, stunned. I smiled, a calm, practiced curve of the lips. Not warm, not cold, just final. The restaurant was elegant and quiet, with soft jazz humming under the clinking of silverware. The maitre d' greeted me by name and led us to a private table by the window. I'd been here twice before, just to make sure I would be treated like a regular, the kind of woman who belonged. My children followed like strangers at a formal gathering, unsure of where to sit, what to say, and how much of their performance would be enough. Rachel, Samuel's girlfriend, was the only one who seemed genuinely at ease. She complimented the restaurant, thanked the waiter for the wine, and leaned over to tell me my hair looked lovely. There was something about her, a quiet confidence not wrapped in pretense. I hadn't expected to like her, but I did. Charles, ever the diplomat, attempted conversation. The foundation is such a thoughtful idea, he said, swirling his wine glass. Your belief in education really shows. My mother always believed in education too, Melissa added quickly, jumping on the opportunity. She taught us that knowledge could take you anywhere. I gave her a thin smile. And yet somehow, it never took you to my leaky apartment. Melissa flushed and looked down at her plate. Samuel cleared his throat, clearly trying to pivot. Mom, about the trust conditions. I think we should talk. Not over lunch, I interrupted. Tell me about your work instead, Samuel. That app you were developing. What's the latest? He fumbled for an answer, feeding me lines he thought would impress. I listened politely, nodded at the right moments, but I was paying more attention to what was behind the words. The calculation. The fear of losing something now that the rules had changed. And Melissa, I said, turning to her. How's the gallery doing? Still featuring that sculptor you were so excited about last year? Her fork paused halfway to her mouth. Yes. Still on display. Of course she was surprised, I knew. They had forgotten I watched, quietly, from the edges of their lives. Social media, mutual friends, updates through people they didn't know still spoke to me. I had stayed silent for years, hoping for love. Now I was simply watching to understand who they'd become. After lunch, we stepped into the cold air again. Snow threatened to fall, the sky heavy with gray. Dinner tomorrow, I said. At the townhouse. 7 o'clock. We were planning to fly back tomorrow morning, Samuel said quickly. Were you? I said, checking my watch. That won't fulfill your monthly visit requirement. His mouth opened, but no words came. I'll see you both at 7, I said, already raising my hand for a cab. I didn't wait to hear their replies. They'd show up. They always did when money was on the table. The rest of the month passed like clockwork. Phone calls every Sunday from Melissa. Every Wednesday from Samuel. Polite, structured conversations full of bland questions and artificial concern. How are you, Mom? The weather must be getting chilly there. Did you go to that concert you mentioned? They played the role of attentive children. I played the role of satisfied mother. But we both knew the truth. This was business, not love. 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, I called them both. I'd like you to come to Boston for the holiday, I said. Bring Charles. Bring Rachel too. They agreed immediately. $50,000 a year ensured obedience. That week, I had the townhouse decorated top to bottom. Garlands of burnt orange and gold, flickering candles, polished silver. I hired a private chef, rented fine china, even booked a staff to serve. If we were going to perform, then we would perform in style. The night before they arrived, I reviewed the foundation files. The trust was performing well. The scholarships were almost ready to be announced. Everything I had built was moving forward. So why did it all feel hollow? I poured myself a glass of Williams aged scotch and stood by the window. The city glittered below. Festive lights blinking from every corner. Boston had welcomed me, or at least my money. Invitations to art openings, fundraisers, elegant dinners arrived weekly. People who wouldn't have held a door open for me 6 months ago now waited for my approval. Just like my children. Yet, I didn't feel triumphant. Only tired. Thanksgiving morning arrived with a cold wind and clear skies. I wore an emerald green dress, soft wool that hugged my waist and brought warmth to my cheeks. When they arrived, together in a shared taxi, I greeted them at the door with practiced grace. Melissa handed me lilies. Lilies. I smiled and thanked her, then quietly placed them in the laundry room. Rachel gave me a hug that felt real. Warm. Your home is beautiful, she said sincerely. Samuel told me about your brother's gift. What an amazing second act. Thank you, Rachel, I said, feeling myself soften a little. Please call me Michelle. Dinner was flawless. Turkey with chestnut stuffing. Orange zest cranberry compote. Wine that danced on the tongue. And yet, the conversation remained stiff. Every word careful. No one wanted to be the one who cracked the surface. Until Melissa did. This is ridiculous, she said, her fork clattering against the china. We're sitting here pretending this is normal, but we all know why we're really here. Please elaborate, I said, taking a sip of wine. The trust. The conditions. This performance. It's cruel, Mom. Cruel, I repeated, setting down my glass. Let me tell you about cruel. Cruel is when your birthday call comes hours late because your daughter was out shopping. Cruel is when your son forgets you exist unless he needs money. Cruel is when you buy a dream house for your mother-in-law while your own mother boils water to bathe because her heater's been shut off. Melissa's eyes filled with tears. That wasn't the same. No. Yes. Patricia deserved every comfort, you said. What did I deserve? No one spoke. Charles looked down. Samuel stared at his plate. Rachel's eyes moved between us all, absorbing everything. You're not going to forgive them, are you? She asked softly. No matter what they do now. The silence around the table was heavy. I met her gaze. The time for forgiveness passed long ago. Now we have a business arrangement. They pretend to care. I pretend to believe them. In exchange, they're compensated. That's twisted, Melissa whispered. No more twisted than pretending I didn't exist until I had something you wanted. I stood and adjusted my dress. Shall we move to the living room for coffee? I believe there's a football game Samuel might want to watch. As the staff cleared the table, they followed behind me, actors hitting their marks. Only Rachel lingered. She touched my arm gently. For what it's worth, she said, I would have liked to know the real you before all this. I looked at her, something fragile stirring in my chest. The real me died a long time ago. Somewhere between the second job I took to pay for college and the night I ate crackers for dinner so Melissa could have a prom dress. She nodded slowly. I get it. Really do. I just hope you don't lose yourself completely in the process. She walked away, leaving me in the dining room, surrounded by the remnants of a perfect meal that had filled no one. Winter came fast in Boston, wrapping the city in wind and snow. The townhouse remained warm, not just from the heating system I'd upgraded but from the barrier wealth builds between you and discomfort. I spent December surrounded by lights, catered meals, and invitations to events that had once felt like distant dreams. But even as the season sparkled around me, something inside remained still and heavy. Christmas cards arrived in perfect timing. One from Melissa and Charles. Matching sweaters, a carefully posed smile. One from Samuel and Rachel, standing in front of a decorated tree, both trying too hard to look happy. The phone calls followed, filled with cheer that sounded like customer service calls. They asked about my holiday plans, though it was clear they hoped I'd say I was staying in. We'd love to have you in Chicago, Samuel said, clearly rehearsed. That's thoughtful, I replied. But I've made other plans. The relief in his voice was too obvious. I didn't elaborate. The truth was, I had booked a suite at a luxury resort in Aspen. I had no interest in skiing, but I wanted silence, solitude. A spa with heated pools, thick robes, champagne at sunset, and views of snow-covered peaks. I wanted to be surrounded by strangers who didn't expect anything from me. Let them imagine me alone and bitter in my big house, sitting by a window with no tree and no presents. Let them feel, even briefly, the shadow of guilt I had carried for years. Between preparations for the trip, I focused on the foundation. Amara and I met regularly, reviewing applications and budgets. We finalized the first 5 scholarship recipients. Bright, determined students from underfunded schools across Massachusetts. They would receive full tuition, housing support and mentorship. Real chances. Real futures. You're changing lives, Amara told me as we signed off on the last package. These kids would never have had this opportunity. I nodded, smiled even, but the joy didn't quite settle in my chest. I had done something good, something meaningful, but at night, when I lay in William's bed with silence pressing in, I didn't see the students. I saw Melissa's stunned face at the Thanksgiving table. Samuel's discomfort when I brought up the money he owed. And behind all of it, their eyes, calculating, cautious, pretending. Then came Rachel. It was a week before Christmas when she appeared at my door, cheeks flushed from the cold, snow melting in her dark hair. She hadn't called. She hadn't texted. She just showed up. Sorry to drop by like this, she said. Samuel doesn't know I'm here. I invited her in, more curious than cautious. She declined coffee, but took tea, wrapping her hands around the cup like she needed the warmth more than the drink. We sat in the front parlor where everything was elegant, silent, and precise. "I broke up with Samuel," she said with no preface. "Last night." I raised an eyebrow. "I'm sorry to hear that." "No, you're not," she said with a small smile. "And you shouldn't be." I didn't answer. She sipped her tea. "After Thanksgiving, I started noticing things. The way he spoke about you when you weren't around. The way he checked the calendar for those calls. Not because he cared but because he had to. That surprised you." "It disappointed me," she said. "I come from nothing. Foster care, scholarships, jobs that barely paid rent. When Samuel told me about your inheritance, I pictured some pampered woman who'd never known struggle. Then I saw the real story." I stayed quiet, letting her speak. "I thought you should know / Your plan is working. They're miserable. Melissa's drinking too much. Samuel feels trapped. They know deep down what they did. And they hate that you've made it impossible to hide from." I watched her carefully. "Why are you telling me this?" She met my eyes. "Because you deserve to know that you've won. But also because winning isn't healing anything." Her words hit harder than I expected. "You're punishing them for treating you like a resource," she continued. "But now that's exactly what you've become. A transaction to be managed." I stood up and walked to the window. The snow outside was falling slower now, thick and steady. The kind that covers everything. "What would you have me do, Rachel? Forgive them? Pretend none of it happened? Hand them millions so they can keep forgetting I exist?" "No," she said softly. "But maybe there's a middle path. One where you hold them accountable without turning your heart to stone." "There is no middle," I replied. "There never was. Not once they decided I wasn't useful." She stood, setting her cup down. "My last foster mother told me something I never forgot. She said, 'Hurt people, but healed people heal people.' I didn't understand it then. I think I'm starting to now." I looked at her, something stirring, something unfamiliar. Guilt. Well, something quieter. Exhaustion, maybe. "I'm not healed, Rachel. None of us are," she said. "But power isn't revenge. It's breaking the cycle." After she left, I sat in William's study with the lights off, staring at the envelope he had left me. I read his letter again. "Use it wisely, little sister." I had thought I was using it wisely. I had thought justice would taste sweeter. But what if all I had done was rearranged the pain into a neater box? That thought followed me to Aspen. I watched fireworks explode over the snow-covered peaks on New Year's Eve, a glass of champagne in my hand, the sky lit up with beauty I didn't feel. My phone buzzed. Texts from Melissa and Samuel. Hollow wishes. Obligatory love. And that night I made a decision. Not out of weakness. Out of clarity. The next morning I called Rebecca. "I need to change the trust," I said. "Substantially." 2 weeks later, we were seated in Rebecca's conference room again. Melissa, Samuel, Charles, and me. The room felt colder this time, not because of the weather, but because the air was thick with expectation. They thought I was there to tighten the screws, to add more rules, more control. I let them sit in that discomfort as long as I could before giving the signal to begin. Rebecca opened the meeting with her usual calm. "Michelle has made the decision to restructure the trusts," she said. "The foundation will remain the primary beneficiary of her estate, but there will be significant changes to how the individual trusts for Melissa and Samuel are managed." I watched their faces. Melissa's brow furrowed. Samuel folded his arms tightly across his chest. Charles said nothing. He never did when things got uncertain. Rebecca continued. "The behavioral conditions that were previously attached to the trusts are being removed." Melissa blinked. "Wait, what?" "Instead," Rebecca said, sliding forward 2 new documents, "each of you will receive a one-time immediate payment of $250,000. The remaining $500,000 will be held until Michelle's passing and will be transferred to you directly, regardless of the nature of your relationship with her from this point forward." The silence that followed was longer than the last time. But it was different. Not tense. I don't understand, Melissa finally said. No more phone calls. No visits. No. Anything. No obligations, I said simply. No pretending. No performance. It ends today. Samuel leaned forward, eyes narrowing. So, you're just letting us go? I'm releasing us, I corrected him. You're free from pretending to love me, and I'm free from the illusion that I can buy what should have been given freely. Melissa looked wounded. So that's it. After everything. We just take this money and leave. I watched her carefully. Why are you telling me this? She met my eyes. Because you deserve to know that you've won. But also, because winning isn't healing anything. Her words hit harder than I expected. You're punishing them for treating you like a resource, she continued. But now that's exactly what you've become. A transaction to be managed. I stood up and walked to the window. The snow outside was falling slower now, thick and steady. The kind that covers everything. What would you have me do, Rachel? Forgive them. Pretend none of it happened. Hand them millions so they can keep forgetting I exist. No, she said softly. But maybe there's a middle path. One where you hold them accountable without turning your heart to stone. There is no middle, I replied. There never was. Not once they decided I wasn't useful. She stood, setting her cup down. My last foster mother told me something I never forgot. She said, hurt people, but healed people heal people. I didn't understand it then. I think I'm starting to now. I looked at her, something stirring, something unfamiliar. Guilt. Oh. Something quieter. Exhaustion maybe. I'm not healed, Rachel. None of us are, she said. But power isn't revenge. It's breaking the cycle. After she left, I sat in William's study with the lights off, staring at the envelope he had left me. I read his letter again. Use it wisely, little sister. I had thought I was using it wisely. I had thought justice would taste sweeter. But what if all I had done was rearrange the pain into a neater box? That thought followed me to Aspen. I watched fireworks explode over the snow-covered peaks on New Year's Eve. A glass of champagne in my hand. The sky lit up with beauty I didn't feel. My phone buzzed. Texts from Melissa and Samuel. Hollow wishes. Obligatory love. And that night I made a decision. Not out of weakness. Out of clarity. The next morning I called Rebecca. I need to change the trust, I said. Substantially. 2 weeks later, we were seated in Rebecca's conference room again. Melissa, Samuel, Charles, and me. The room felt colder this time, not because of the weather, but because the air was thick with expectation. They thought I was there to tighten the screws, to add more rules, more control. I let them sit in that discomfort as long as I could before giving the signal to begin. Rebecca opened the meeting with her usual calm. Michelle has made the decision to restructure the trusts, she said. The foundation will remain the primary beneficiary of her estate, but there will be significant changes to how the individual trusts for Melissa and Samuel are managed. I watched their faces. Melissa's brow furrowed. Samuel folded his arms tightly across his chest. Charles said nothing. He never did when things got uncertain. Rebecca continued. The behavioral conditions that were previously attached to the trusts are being removed. Melissa blinked. Wait, what? Instead, Rebecca said, sliding forward 2 new documents, each of you will receive a one-time immediate payment of $250,000. The remaining $500,000 will be held until Michelle's passing and will be transferred to you directly, regardless of the nature of your relationship with her from this point forward. The silence that followed was longer than the last time. But it was different. Not tense. I don't understand, Melissa finally said. No more phone calls. No visits. No. Anything. No obligations, I said simply. No pretending. No performance. It ends today. Samuel leaned forward, eyes narrowing. So, you're just letting us go? I'm releasing us, I corrected him. You're free from pretending to love me, and I'm free from the illusion that I can buy what should have been given freely. Melissa looked wounded. So that's it. After everything. We just take this money and leave. That's up to you, I said. You're free to stay in touch. Or not. But anything from here on out will be because you choose to, not because I'm paying you to. Samuel looked like he wanted to say something, but couldn't quite find the words. Instead he asked, and if we do want to try? Not for money. Just to try. I turned to him slowly. Do you really want that? Or are you just trying to make sure the door isn't closed? He was quiet for a moment. I don't know. I haven't tried being your son without expecting something in return for a long time. His honesty surprised me. It softened something in me, though not enough to let down my guard. That's fair, I said. Then the door remains open. But no more carrots. No more sticks. Whatever happens next is on your terms. We signed the new documents in silence. When it was done, Rebecca excused herself, leaving the four of us alone. Melissa stared down at the table, not speaking. Charles glanced at her, but knew better than to intervene. Samuel sat still, his thumb nervously rubbing the edge of the chair's armrest. So that's it? Melissa asked again, this time more softly. We just move on. I will, I said, standing and gathering my coat. I'll be in Boston working with the foundation, living the life I've built. If you want to be part of that life, the door's unlocked. But only if you're walking through it because you want to, not because there's a prize on the other side. I moved to the door, then turned back to them one last time. And for what it's worth, I hope one day you understand why I did all of this. Not to hurt you, but to finally set myself free. Then I stepped out, closing the door softly behind me. Out in the hallway, sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows. It hit the polished tile in front of me like a spotlight, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. I wasn't waiting for love. I wasn't begging for scraps. I wasn't clinging to illusions of what motherhood should have looked like. It was just me. Not someone's obligation. Not someone's burden. Not someone's item. And that feeling, that quiet, solid sense of self, it was worth more than all the money William had left me. He hadn't just given me his fortune. He had given me my freedom. True freedom, not revenge, not control, not performance. But the right to decide what I was worth, and the strength to never accept less again. I walked out of the building into the winter sunshine, and this time my smile wasn't cold or rehearsed. It was real. And it was mine as I stepped onto the icy sidewalk. The wind brushed against my face like a final cleanse. The city moved around me. Honking taxis, hurried footsteps, the hum of life. But inside me there was only stillness. Not the aching, lonely kind. The peaceful kind. The kind that comes when you've stopped expecting something from people who never knew how to give it. I didn't go straight home. I walked through the public garden, past frozen fountains and bare trees. The same paths I used to walk when I was a young woman visiting Boston for teaching conferences, imagining a different kind of life. Back then I dreamed of comfort, of appreciation, of being seen. I had no idea that decades later, I'd return not as a visitor, but as the owner of a life no one had planned for me, not even myself. That night, I sat by the fireplace in the townhouse, wrapped in a blanket that still smelled faintly of cedar and age. William's presence lingered in this house, in the books he'd collected, in the quiet reverence of the rooms. I thought about his letter, the way he had written "use it wisely." For a long time I thought wisdom meant justice. Then I thought it meant control. But now I knew. Wisdom meant knowing when to hold on and when to let go. The foundation launched officially the following spring. Our first group of students received their scholarships at a modest but heartfelt ceremony. Parents cried. Students hugged me. One girl whispered, "You've changed everything," before disappearing into the crowd with her acceptance letter clutched like treasure. And for the first time I believed it. I hadn't just changed my life. I'd broken the cycle. I never heard from Melissa again after that final meeting. She sent a thank you card when the first payment arrived. Typed and signed sterile. Samuel surprised me once. In April he called. Not on a Wednesday. Not prompted by money. Just called. He asked how the foundation was going. Told me he'd started therapy. That Rachel's words at Thanksgiving had stayed with him too. We spoke for 15 minutes. It wasn't emotional or groundbreaking. But it was real. And that was enough. I didn't expect a reunion. I didn't crave one. I just allowed space for it if it ever came. I spent that year building, not looking back. I hosted fundraising events, mentored students, reconnected with colleagues who remembered me before I disappeared into motherhood. Some days were still quiet, but they didn't ache anymore. One afternoon, while organizing William's files, I found an old photograph tucked inside a book of poetry. It was the three of us, William, me, and our mother, at a beach I barely remembered. We were laughing. Real, uninhibited joy. Before betrayals. Before silence. I placed it in a small silver frame and set it on my desk. A reminder that some things are worth holding on to, but only the parts that fed the soul, not the ones that drained it. And so, life moved forward. Not loudly, not dramatically, but steadily. I traveled alone. Ate at restaurants where waiters knew my name. Wrote again. Poems about grief and growth, and the strange, slow journey of reclaiming your own name after decades of being Mom, Mrs. Campbell, or the woman with the leaky ceiling. One evening, at a quiet dinner event for the foundation, a young woman, one of our scholarship recipients, stood up to speak. She cleared her throat and said, "I didn't have a real family growing up. But this scholarship didn't just give me education. Gave me belief. It told me I mattered." She looked at me, eyes shining. And that means more than money ever could. I didn't cry. I just nodded. 'Cause I finally understood. It had never been about the money. It was about remembering who I was. Before the sacrifices, before the silence, before the loss. It was about choosing to matter to myself. And that, finally, was enough. There wasn't a grand ending. No dramatic final act, no tearful reunions, no public declarations of regret or redemption. Life rarely offers those. What I received instead was something far more honest. Quiet mornings, meaningful work, and the kind of peace that comes from choosing yourself after years of being chosen last. I often thought about the version of me that sat alone in that rundown apartment, listening to water drip through the ceiling like the ticking of a slow, humiliating clock. That woman had begged, silently, invisibly, for her children to see her, to remember the warmth of the hands that packed their school lunches, the tired eyes that stayed open late grading papers to keep food on the table. She had waited for birthdays to matter, for Christmas cards to carry love instead of duty. But no one came for her. And so she left, quietly, gracefully. She stepped out of their lives with nothing but a broken ceiling and a broken heart. The woman I had become wouldn't recognize that silence anymore. Now I filled my days with purpose. Interviews with local journalists about the foundation, meetings with school boards, handwritten letters to every scholarship recipient. I had become someone who mattered not because I demanded it, but because I gave without conditions. Not to my children, but to those who could still be shaped by kindness. One spring afternoon, I stood on the rooftop garden of the townhouse, watching the city breathe beneath me. Tulips bloomed in pots along the railing. The wind carried the faint scent of magnolias from the park. Below, I heard the distant laughter of students. It reminded me of the hallway buzz in my old school. I missed that sometimes. Not the exhaustion, but the raw, hopeful energy of young minds that hadn't yet been taught to abandon their dreams. A letter arrived the next day. Handwritten. No return address. The script was unfamiliar but careful. Dear Ms. Campbell. Asterisk. My name is Eliza. I'm one of the students your foundation chose. I wanted to tell you that your story changed me, not just the scholarship but your story. I found an old interview of yours online and it made me cry. Not because it was sad but because it was real. You reminded me that pain doesn't define us. We can still build beautiful things from it. Thank you for choosing me. Asterisk. That letter stayed on my desk longer than anything else. Sometimes I still heard from Samuel. Occasionally he would call. Not every week, not consistently. But without reason, which mattered more. Once, he mentioned that he was thinking about writing to me. Not a message, but a letter. Like people used to, he said. I told him I'd welcome that. Melissa never reached out again. Not after the trust restructure. Not even when I sent word that the foundation would be launching a mentorship program in her city. I saw her in the paper once, attending a gala with Charles. She looked radiant, distant, just like always. And I didn't feel a sting. Just nothing. Because I no longer lived in hope of her transformation. That, I had learned, was the final tether. The deepest cut. Once you stop hoping someone will come back to you whole, you stop bleeding. You begin to heal. On the anniversary of William's death, I returned to the family beach in the photo I'd found. Alone. I sat in the sand, watched the waves, and whispered a quiet thank you into the wind. Not just for the money, but for the push. The strange, delayed act of love that had finally handed me back my own name. Michelle Campbell. Not just a mother. Not just a teacher. Not just a shadow. A woman with edges and strength and flaws and worth. A woman who had finally stopped asking to be chosen, and chosen herself. And for the first time in her life, she stayed. Years passed, not in the blur of routine, but in the clarity that only reinvention can bring. The townhouse became more than a symbol of inheritance. It became a home that reflected the woman I had become. The books on the shelves weren't just William's anymore. I added my own collections of poetry, essays I wrote late at night, even a manuscript I never thought I'd finish. The guest rooms were no longer just empty space. They held memories of visiting students, young women who came for guidance, who sat with me over tea and cried about things I had once cried about too. They reminded me that some hearts are still open, still soft, still capable of deep connection. I gave them time and stories and truth. Things my own children had once received but discarded like old furniture when they no longer fit the image. I never removed the photo from my desk, the one of William, our mother, and me on that distant beach. It remained there, not as a relic of pain, but as a reminder that family, like memory, is complex, flawed. But it still matters in strange and incomplete ways. Samuel wrote me, finally. A letter just like he said. It wasn't long. Just a single page. Asterisk. I don't know how to say sorry in a way that feels big enough, so I won't try. I don't expect anything from this. I just wanted you to know .. I remember the time you stayed up all night sewing my Halloween costume. The way you clapped the loudest at my terrible middle school play. Remember, Mom? I do. Asterisk. I sat with the letter in my lap, unmoving for a long time. I didn't cry. Not because I wasn't moved, but because it didn't ache the way it used to. It didn't come from need anymore. Came from peace. He called more after that. Not often. Not always with much to say. But there was no money involved. No timing to hit. Just him. Learning. Trying. Melissa never came around. I thought she might send a card when news of the foundation's national expansion hit the press. She didn't. I let that wound close. Some people leave you not once, but in layers. And with every silence, every absence, I released another piece of the woman who kept waiting. The foundation thrived. 5 students turned into 50. 50 into hundreds. I met governors, philanthropists, and changemakers. I stood on stages and spoke into microphones, once terrified of being seen, now steady in my voice. I wasn't hiding anymore. Not behind sacrifice. Not behind bitterness. Not behind motherhood. I was simply Michelle. No explanation. No apologies. One morning, a student I mentored stopped by unexpectedly. She was graduating. First in her class. She handed me a small gift box. Inside was a silver necklace. A tiny charm shaped like a book, etched with a single word. Legacy. I smiled, touched beyond words. This isn't for what you gave me, she said. It's for who you showed me I could become. After she left, I sat by the window, turning the charm over in my hand. It was light, delicate, But it carried weight. Not of the past, but of what I had done with it. I had taken betrayal and made it into structure. I had taken loneliness and turned it into access. I had taken silence and built something louder than any apology. And in the quiet of that morning light, I finally understood that legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what you live, every day, in the choices you make when no one is watching. I rose from the chair, walked to the study, and placed the necklace beside the photo on my desk. William had left me his estate. But I had built something greater. A life that didn't wait to be chosen. A legacy that began the moment I chose myself, and never looked back.